the battle hasn't ceased, and we can't act like it has. Any day that we wake up feeling like we've made it or we're over the mountain or something like that, whatever, that's a sentiment that will come back and bite us, because we'll have issues like the one that started this conversation, attacks on the very things that we're doing to make sure that we promote ourselves and get our young people into pipelines that lead to something good. And I think it's incumbent on us that have a little bit of age to us to defend them until our dying day. Last day, our last breath has to be dedicated to make sure that we leave behind pipelines for them that they can get to where they need to get.
It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free.
Well, good morning. It's Friday. It's Freedom Friday, and you are still not free. But hopefully you'll be freer after this hour with Ish, Sharif, and me. Fellas, I try to surprise you every week about what we're going to talk about today, but I thought about y'all yesterday because this actually I know affects definitely you, Sharif, and it might affect you, Ish. Definitely affects me on some of the things I want to do in the world. But there is a law firm in Virginia that is responsible for multiple lawsuits that are a lot like the ones against Harvard University about affirmative action. And the goal of the lawsuits are to say that anything that tries to do something special for a group of people, like Black people, for instance, a historically marginalized protected class, but anything that is special in terms of a program for them has to stop, has to come down, because it's actually racial discrimination. And the most recent, let me back up a little bit about a different example. There's a venture capitalist fund that is aimed at helping Black women break into venture capital. That fund actually is meant to increase the number of Black women who in Silicon Valley have some stake within Silicon Valley. Right now, it's probably about 1 or 2% Black women out of all people that are getting the venture capital money to start all different kinds of venture capital things. The gross majority, everybody who gets that is white, because it's an old boys network. It's a young boys network. Like, not even the old boys network. It's the new boys network. So programs like this one are a fund where people put money into the fund so that they can help Black women get started in tech businesses. And the same people who did the Harvard lawsuit actually sued behind this and got the fund to stop. I don't know where it's at right now, because I think it was a temporary halt. The judge halted them being able to give any more money out, right? What I saw yesterday is a little bit more distressing to me, is because UCLA is being sued for a program that helps Black men or Black students do well at the school. So nationally, we have all these school programs that are like the one, Sharif, that you know of, and actually, Ish, you probably know of too. Like in Minneapolis, we had this Office of Black Male Achievement. Offices like that would have to close, right? Now, the reason we started the Office of Black Male Achievement is because we had a particular problem with educating, particularly Black males. So a solution was to address that problem. But how can you address that problem if you can't even say Black male in the program? Now, I want to jump in here, but the implications of this is every pipeline that goes straight to the point of like helping Black men or Black people or Black students, all of them would be in jeopardy of getting any type of funding, private or public. So that's the thing about this. Like, that venture capitalist fund was a private fund of money wanting to pool their money together to help them. So they're going after all of it in terms of us being able to do anything special for ourselves. So what do you guys think about this? There's two things I want to ask about this. Number one is, what do you think about it just in general about do we fight back and how we fight back and all that? But then there's also people, oddly enough, even in our own camp, saying stuff like, well, I mean, it's time for that stuff to end anyways. We don't need blah, 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 blah. Y'all have heard me do the Uncle Ruckus thing. Y'all need to start taking in white people's money. All right. So, and good white people. So
you're going to make me watch an episode tonight.
So what do you think? Should we be taking them good white people's money or what? And if not, how do we fight back? Like, because this will affect all of us.
Yeah, man. I mean, this is so layered, right? Like, I mean, it speaks to like who's sitting on the bench, right? To even pause something like that, and it's private money, right? Like, and first thing that came to my mind when I first heard about, like, I wonder if this was a appointed judge or a voted in judge. Either way, it's tied to votes some kind of way, where you have these people who, with these kind of framework, and it's private money, I mean, which, ultimately it shows that the war against Black people, the war against equity, the war against brown people is still on. It just looks differently. Right. And they use legal means, they use policy means, which they've always used, right? Like, creating enslavement was a lot of policies and laws and mindsets, right? And so there's no line of demarcation where all that changed, right? It just looks a lot differently now. It's less hooded now than it was before. It's more openly declared than it was, in recent years. But I think I think this has substantial and significant um, consequences on the work that we're doing. So we have to really, again, back to organizing, back to having legal minds, policy minds, all, and just think about all the planning sessions, not just meeting to talk, not the barbershop talk kind of meetings, the meetings to actually plan things out, even just to get to what the NAACP used to do back in the day. Which I guess they do at a smaller sense with the Legal Defense Fund. But remember, they were like constantly challenging things across the country, and now these folks are doing it. I'm hoping that those with legal minds and otherwise are also having those meetings that we're not necessarily invited to, but that they should be happening. And I've heard of some strategies that people are using, but I think while we're doing those strategies, we also need to confront these these cases head on as well, not just, oh well, let's do it this way and let's do it that way. I think we should do that short term, but long term, we should knuckle up. You know,
Yeah, and this could also affect HBCUs. Think about that. Get your mind around that.
listen, somebody, the brother. I was at Braven yesterday, and they had a fantastic conference, and one of the things that they were talking about, Richard Reeves was there, about the one who wrote the book about boys and men,
Mm-hmm.
and he talked about. I didn't get a chance to connect with him about it, but there are some HBCUs with more non-Black people than Black men
Mm-hmm.
attending them.
Yeah, so there are some HBCUs that are still designated as historically Black colleges that are mostly white.
Yeah, I thought that was just the West Virginia joint. I was like, well, it's West Virginia, but he's like, no, this is
It's happening.
Is happening, and as Black men decrease in these spaces, so then we're like, all right, how do we support more Black men?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no, that's illegal to support more Black men, right? Like,
isn't that crazy though? How twisted that is.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Ish?
I mean, I think it's just like an ongoing pattern, man. They switch up the rules every time the game tends to be somewhat in our favor. And I wouldn't even say it's in our favor. It's just trying to survive. And so you think of any
You get
backlash.
your face above water.
Yeah.
They
like,
add some gallons back up. Like, that's all. We're treading water. That's it. We're not rising above it. Treading water is, calls for them to try to smack us down.
Yeah, and even the rationale, like private funds being held up because of it. I thought that was the argument back in the day. And we're like, well, these are private businesses. They can make these decisions. And right, so like they're doing mental gymnastics, judicial gymnastics to kind of use the rhetoric that people fought for, right? Some people use the rhetoric like, we want a colorblind society. We want the ability to have these opportunities without determination of race. But they weren't talking about we're there yet and that you just get rid of it. But even our Supreme Court Justice Chief, John Roberts, has said, when they were voting on the Voting Rights Act, basically taking the teeth out of it, said, oh, these things are in the past. These are no longer an issue. And so, like, we see what has happened when those teeth were taken out of the Voting Rights Act. These states start enacting laws to put and clamp down on and target Black voters and set up districts that disenfranchise Black voters. So this is an ongoing pattern. And number one, we shouldn't be surprised. We should be thinking, number one, like Sharif was just saying, ways to get around it. But number two, how are we going to knuckle up and fight back? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, this is going to come back and they'll be like, what's wrong with you? Are you racist against white people? And flip it on its head. And I wouldn't even be surprised if some of the first people who start to get arrested for hate crimes would be Black people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
every time somebody gets arrested and it's a white person that's a victim and it's a Black person that's a perpetrator, could end up as a hate crime in the future. And they are going that direction because they're starting to say things like Black people, not starting, they've been saying this for a long time, but it's actually circulating more in right-wing media now. Black people are only 13% of the population. They can commit 50% of the crime. You will hear that if you spend any time auditing right-wing media for a day, you will hear that multiple times in a day. It's actually like one of the talking points now that's taking hold. So Ish, it's not out of character or out of pocket to say that, you know, we might get called up on charges of hate crimes. But two things I want to say. The first one is they are taking off the table the idea that whatever happened to Black people in the United States does not require remediation any longer. That's the first ground that they're standing on is, yes, something may have happened to you, but it's over. And it no longer, and there was a period of remediation, and that period is over now because you have Oprah, you have Obama, you have Jay-Z, you have Kanye, you have, just keep going down the list of very wealthy Black celebrities, right? And that's evidence that we no longer need to remediate. I mean, even when it comes to affirmative action, many of the Black people that were getting into Harvard through affirmative action were coming from middle class and upper middle class Black families.
And some of them slammed the gates once they got over there.
Which must be proof, though, that it's no longer necessary. That as an argument point is actually is killing us because no one is standing up saying, wait a second. Tell me on what date it stopped being stopped being an impact that was directly related to history. What decade was it? Was it 92? Was it 2003? Was it 87? Give me a year in which the effects of the capitalization problem that happened during slavery. Give me a date when that ended, because then I'll give on the point of, okay, then maybe we don't need any more remediation because, you know, the impact stopped happening. So that's one thing. The second thing I'm going to say is more harsh. And I'm getting so sick of people's. And Sharif, you know, the example I give all times of Philly is the thing I sent you a while ago with the NAACP in Philly from years ago, from its founding, used to have that membership card. And on the membership card, it said that the goal of the NAACP was to separate the Black middle class from the disrepute of the Black masses. Exact words, disrepute of the Black masses,
up
right?
South, man. Up South by Matthew Countryman is enlightening, and it focuses on Philadelphia, but it was, you know, warped Black minds, you know.
And the reason I point that out, though, is I just pointed out to say, when we think about the NAACP today, those are the groups that we think would be having this as their project. They would be working on this. Number one, with a strategy. They would be pulling people together for a strategy. They would have some lawsuits and different things that would be counter lawsuits. That's what they used to do. But if you go right now to the NAACP's website and you start looking for who their funders are, like 90-something% of their funders are corporate funders, corporations, including like Walmart and Raytheon and, you know, like Boeing, because they all give money to the NAACP as kind of like they're tithing to the Black cause type of thing, like to say we're doing, you know, corporate responsibility and all that. But what that does is that means we're not funding the NAACP, right? What's it mean that we're not funding the NAACP? It means that they're not for us necessarily. And I don't want to just single them out because they're not the only ones that if you go to their convention and look at all their corporate sponsors, we are not funding our own revolution. We're not funding ourselves. We're not funding independent organizations that will fight these things out. I mean, a few years ago, it was Color of Change, right? They used to do things around these issues, and they were kind of trying to be a newer, younger kind of version of activism. But then they ended up, I think, with corporate sponsors. Anyways, I don't know if you guys see a point there that I'm making, but the point that I'm making is the people who would normally fight these battles for us are missing in action. And the reason they're probably missing in action is because we don't fund them.
Listen, that's hot, heavy, and real. You know what I mean? Like that's I think when you talk about like follow the money, first of all, like, if I'm funding something, um, there's some dialogue at some point between the funder and the fundee about if there's alignment, if there's vision alignment. Like we all have had funders say, "Hey, your work doesn't align to our vision. Your work doesn't align to our giving strategy. Your work doesn't align to our values." Like we've all heard that in different ways, different times, and we'll continue to hear that. And so you have to think about, okay, what is the work that the organizations that used to do this, kind of macro level fighting, and the funders that they may have, and how aligned is it to their giving strategies and things like that? Like, is eradicating white supremacy aligned to their giving strategy? And I do believe there are funders out there that do have that, but I don't know what percentage of funders, at least in that space, is about that. But what I do know is, like, I don't hear. And again, I'm speaking this like with all humility. There's no way in the world I would even be aware of all the things happening. But I am seeing the assaults on, equity. I'm seeing that loud and clear. I see the rhetoric on the other side about how that's not fair and that's not right, and but I don't necessarily see the smoke and the fire. And so that's my curiosity. And I think the one time when I hear about it, it's only saying, "Hey, we'll just vote and that'll absolve everything." And I think that's an unsophisticated view, because there are judges, some with lifetime appointments, some with, less than lifetime, but still monumental impact. So it has to be, voting is one part of the strategy. And too often I'm hearing it talked about like that's the only strategy. And you vote, and then, once that ballot is thrown in, everything else is just hope and prayer. And I'm just like, wait a minute, we're like, that's one part of it, what should be a more sophisticated strategy of a fight.
Well, I mean, there should have been, voting is to me very powerful. So I want to keep that on the table as number one. Yes, it's very important. And two, the implications of the votes that you make become very important. I mean, when Obama didn't put somebody on the Supreme Court, and he had the opportunity to put somebody on the Supreme Court, at least fight for it. When Ruth Bader Ginsburg didn't have a bunch of people coming to her saying, "You're going to die. Step down. You're going to die." Like, it's obvious. You looking like you dead now. So come off this court.
I have the potion.
Right? Yeah. And she's just like, well, it is what it is, man. I'm going to ride this thing out. But Ish, I want to put you on the spot with a question. Mr. Teacher, Mr. Educator. So I always like to look for examples. So are there examples in history or in other people's struggle where they didn't have the money, but somehow they found the power to fight things and fight back? Are there any examples of that through either history or sociology or social studies that you can think of?
I mean, Black people in America have been doing that from jump. From funding their own schools. When, I think of what James Anderson wrote in Education of Blacks in the South, right? The Rosenfeld Fund be like, yeah, or Rosenwald Fund be like, yeah, we'll fund your schools. They come with like $500 when it costs like $20,000. But the community itself raised the money, even if half the folks were sharecropping. You know what I mean? We also have other examples of the early NAACP, where teacher organizations in the South and the Lost Education of Horace Tate, Vanessa Sitterwalker does a great job talking about how these funds were kind of funneled into, secret funds to go up north to fund the NAACP work that was happening around school inequities. And so like these are always stories around folks organizing themselves, even with little resources and little money, to kind of put it together to advocate and also to kind of strengthen the community within itself. So Black folks in America have a long history of that happening. In actuality, kind of the false sense of victory of the civil rights movement, whether real or perceived, kind of took some of that out the wind out the sails per se, because then folks start saying, oh, well, I just need to get a job. I can then move over here and then like do better for myself and my family. Well, the collective kind of identity started to kind of share, to spread a little bit. And don't get it twisted. I know that's a combination of like propaganda and even like this idea of the American dream nonsense, right? Where folks have like bought into, oh, well, all we got to do is like, behave ourselves, act well, and then we'll be able to, fit in within this society. And then eventually all these issues will be over. There were large amounts of people that thought that at one time. And so like when we look at that situation, that's only about like 4 decades ago, if that, where people started to think like that. So right now we're waking up from that like dream or nightmare, whatever you want to call it, and realizing, these folks are still doing the same thing they always do. Switch up the rules when it starts to work in our favor, and then say, oh, well, what are you talking about? You're the person that's wrong. You're just playing victim, right? What's wrong with your children? What's wrong with your family? What's wrong with your culture? What's wrong with, and then it starts to get into anti-Black sentiments and stereotypes that the society always kind of said of laziness, of being violent criminals, and all these type of things feed in itself. So now we look around and folks are like, well, what's the problem? Like you said, look at Oprah, look at Jay-Z, look at, you know what I mean? Look at Obama. You just need to stop complaining. And so when I think of this, Wise Intelligent, the rapper, put a meme up the other day that was brilliant. He says, a handful of Black individuals have always made money in America during both slavery and Jim Crow. They're rich Black people getting to the money. So don't think having Black billionaires means institutional racism and the deliberate disenfranchisement of Black people collectively is not at play. The facts say otherwise. And so like we need to get over this idea that we're making some type of progress, because even when you look at the combination of Black wealth, the percentage of Black people that own that wealth is almost unchanged since the end of slavery. So when you're looking at those figures and statistics, you might be like, I'm doing materially better than my ancestors, of course, right? But collectively, we are not doing better as a people. And we're seeing the situation now where folks start to get into those positions and be like, I want to create these organizations. I want to create these opportunities for children that might not have the opportunity from where they're from. And then folks will be turned around and be like, well, that's racist. That's discriminating against a white boy in the rural community who does better. I mean, who should have the same opportunity. And that zero-sum game has turned into the fact that we're getting into the position now that it will be hard to argue in the courts that you should benefit Black people over other people, because we have allowed this narrative to perpetuate itself, this myth of racial progress, to the point where it's like, wow, look, we're about to elect a Black, the first Black woman, South Asian president, you know what I mean? And like this narrative of the facial, the superficial image over the substance.
Mm-hmm. Well,
kind of stops us from really fighting for what we need to fight for.
I want to do what I always do, which is put in something into the pot that's controversial, which is how agreeable are you to the point that we have a culture problem, an ethic problem, because we have been trained over time to atomize, like the things that used to be collective about us now have been put into separate apartments. We all have our own apartment. We all get our own Section 8. We all get our little piece of whatever. We don't share sugar with each other or butter like we used to in our neighborhoods. We don't have a porch society anymore where people know each other from the porch, right? Like, so over time, the training created a post-racial, post-slavery Black culture that is about the consumerism and individualism, the lack of the collective thinking. And because when you break that, you break everything that is possible about helping us help ourselves. So even Black people who get some money don't see Black people as a good investment, right? So when you go to them and say, hey, I have this education problem or this education thing, and I'm trying to get 1 million Black men, or I'm trying to get 75,000 Black kids to Ghana or whatever, They're like, well, listen, I only got $10 million and you're asking me for something that feels like it's about $500,000. And I just don't see that as a good, as a good investment. Go ask Walmart for that. So our ethic, our Black ethics, our Black culture is actually, well, let me just stop and say this. If we were doing everything we possibly could for ourselves collectively, we wouldn't need anybody's help. Bottom line. So if you wake up every morning believing that, if we were doing everything for ourselves collectively that we could be doing, we wouldn't need anybody else's help, then that sounds like that's the first problem.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like the vision has become malaised, where we're like unsure exactly what the end goal should even be. I think a lot of people have adopted the dominant values within this society and have taken it in as their own as a way to operate within this society. I think it's also incentivized to be like that. I think ultimately, even some of the history that has created the circumstances that we see right now is being pushed down the memory hole in the 1984 type of way. Where even where it wasn't talked about, it's like, oh, you can't talk about it now by law. You can't have your children talk about it. You can't, you know what I mean? So think about the gravity of that. But even in the places where it is allowed, many folks are unaware. And so like when you're talking about all these type of things, I think as a combination of people accepting this dominant culture, which is kind of, I would say, backwards a little bit. I would also say, and individualistic, I would also say it's this kind of malaise of like, where are we going? What do we do? Do we, try to get a piece of pie in master's house and, have our set of the table look nice and pretty so we can compare it to other people's sets on the table, right? Or is it something even deeper where folks do want to have something different and know something's wrong in their gut, but there's no clear idea of what that is? So like when we're talking about all those things, I think it's a very complicated layered type of thing. And it is scary. I think of one of the last poets in the documentary, the Black Power mixtape. He even said, Black people love America. They've hold her to his bosom, to cultivate it. But if Black people lost their minds, America is not too far behind. And I'm afraid sometimes that we're getting to that point where folks have accepted this so much. The only thing that gives me hope are conversations like this, brothers like you and Sharif, the students I've had, some of the people I've met. But overall, man, we're not doing well. And there's no type of incentive to really think of anything different besides get my own.
You got to get mine. You got to get yours. I mean, Sharif, the reason why I felt like it was provocative to even say that is because I'm saying we have a problem with our culture and our ethic and we're our own enemy and all that. But then I come to an event like yours and it completely is it's a counter revolutionary act in my mind of like, see, I just thought that and I just said that. But then I end up with 1,000 Black men in Philadelphia at one event, and I see nothing but mutual aid, mutual support, pride in being together, pride in the collective, information sharing, information gathering. And, like when you and I were in Chicago and we were in a room full of Black scholars, it was the same thing. And, we will be in those places. So the idea that I say what I said, like, oh, we have a Black culture problem, a Black ethics and blah, blah, it is being provocative because it's not absolutely my lived experience. I'm also in rooms where people are doing what you just said is we are coming together at places and we have points of coming together.
Yeah. I mean, but what you said is, the reason why I don't believe is provocative because I think there's a lot of truth in it, Chris. So even if we're in those smaller spaces, the collective, economic power of those smaller spaces, is not tremendous, right? And I think that we all believe that even if we don't have tremendous economic power, we should still be organizing, pushing, fighting, lifting as we climb, all those kind of just deep seated values that we have as communal people, that we maintain those ties, we maintain those strategies, we do all those things. I think part of the worst thing that America is about propaganda. That's a big part of the if you look at the Wizard of Oz as like an example, the curtain, behind the curtain is one thing. What they propagate, the messages that they send. An example of that is America was, rugged individualism,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
rugged individualism. It was chattel slavery. It was a level of ruggedness.
Yeah.
It was chattel slavery.
Yeah,
It was oppression of Asians on the West, on the West Coast, and the eradication of Native American, right? Like, but the
White affirmative action.
Yeah, the constant refrain is rugged individualism. And so what happens is when we have Black groups, and I love that you brought up, like, even during enslavement, there were Black millionaires. Even during Reconstruction, there were Black millionaires. There were Black men who owned Black enslaved people, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, like this is all part of, the connectivity. And so when we look at it today, and just to be like, oh, but that's what's flash, that's what's in front, and what they layer on is, hey, see these individuals who rose up, and what they don't want you to see as much as, like, yo, that white supremacist mafia, they've never been individuals. They've always been a collective. They've always been organized. They've always been well funded. But they talk about, like, oh, look, here's this individual. He did all, like, nah, here's what his pappy did. Here's what his grandpappy did. Here's what his grandpa did. And like, oh, Trump, he's so brilliant. Look at all the men. Here's what his pappy did. Here's what his grandpappy did. Here's what his great grandpappy did. Right? Like, they've never been rugged individuals. They've been ruthless collectives that have created this. But we sometimes in our, what Malcolm used to say, political chumps. When we have that chump mentality, we're like, see, they did it, so we should just do it. Not even realizing, like, nah, ruthless collectives have created something.
I know y'all too old for TikTok, and I'm not, but I know y'all too old for it. But what you don't know is, first of all, I go live on TikTok now, so I do live.
Are you serious?
Live.
Like, wow, bro. Look at you.
Yeah, man. I got kicked off now, banned twice for violations.
Nice, congratulations.
From stuff that I said. But there is a whole group of Black men on TikTok who have created a new subculture of angry, hostile, what have those people ever done for us type of mentality. And it's like they're basically joining the other team. And I saw one the other day that was around, this dude was just defending Elon Musk. And he was like, y'all just keep saying all that stupid stuff about you'll never be a billionaire. You'll never be a billionaire. And his whole thing was like, man, stop saying that to me. Like, I'm bigger than you, blah, 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 whatever. And it was all in defense of Elon Musk. And it sounded very much like somebody you would know, like a brother that just sounded real from the streets, blah, blah, blah. But the message was Elon Musk is good. He's great. He's what we should aspire to be. So the politics that get us going that direction, like the politics of cutting taxes and all that stuff. And it's just so prevalent and backwards. I don't think we even know this whole subculture is growing, and they're being marketed to, and they're getting younger. And this is a marketing thing. Anyways, let me say this quote Ishmael put up. This is from Barbara Sizemore, and I'll ask you guys to tell the audience who Barbara Sizemore was, as an educator, as somebody in Chicago that should have a monument in Chicago to the work that she did. But she said, if they attempt to outlaw the collection of racial data, white supremacy can escalate in its present subtle and extra-legal forms: legacy, kinship, friendship, and the accumulated advantages generated by slavery, American apartheid, and tradition. African Americans and other pariah groups will be locked in an inferior position and status. And since no data will be available, no one can mobilize for change or prove racial preference for whites. That's deep. And, I think I would have to say it like 3 times. This is the importance of Black scholarship. Like, people who can articulate things for you that you know already, but you need somebody to put it together. What she's saying here is deep. This quote is just deep. Anyways, who was she? Say something about who she was, because, we're a Black education show.
Well, she started her education career in Chicago. She was there for, a couple decades, and then she actually moved to Pittsburgh, taught at the University of Pittsburgh, and also served at the Board of Education in Pittsburgh for Pittsburgh Public Schools, and was just a huge advocate of kind of, education that benefited Black children. And she fought, her dedicated her life to that. And even like some of her own positions, I, don't 100% agree. But at the end of the day, the objective I definitely agree on. And that is providing Black children with a quality education. There ain't nothing wrong with them. There's something wrong with the system that supposedly educates or miseducates them. And she was very clear of that, especially, towards the end of her life, where she definitely went out of her way to kind of like advocate for the use of alternative education methods, right, or buildings or schools, rather than the traditional public school system. So she was just very profound in that regard. And that quote, as soon as we started this conversation, that's the first thing that came to my mind. I was all searching for it because again, if you erase the situation in which created the circumstances we exist in, and then flip it around and be like, well, what's wrong with you? You have all the opportunities. It's not my fault. Your dad wasn't there to raise you. And then all the racist tropes, even though there's, you know what I mean? There's a lot more complex realities that exist, but that feeds into already existing ideas about Black folks that just fits into that. Oh, well, that does make sense. Well, something's wrong with them. Look at this person, they made it. So, and that also ties to what Sharif was just saying and what we referenced earlier, where in 1863, before the end of slavery, right, half of 1%, so 0.5% of Black people hold all total national wealth. Today, 1.5% of Black people, own 1.5% of the total wealth. So you're talking about a percentage point more.
That sounds like progress, bro. That sounds like progress. We made progress. See, y'all don't know how to look at progress. Well, listen. So number one, people, if you go to YouTube and you look for Barbara Sizemore, you're going to find interviews with her, and I have found the interviews very compelling. Like they're very interesting to watch. They're old. The ones I saw felt like they were 80-ish, or in the 80s type of thing. But the stuff she was saying was so powerful and straight up, and it had none of the belief gap in it. This idea that, we're a deficit thinking or any of that. She was just straight up, no, we can teach kids. We can teach our kids. And that's what I love about her. And then I would add to this Ron Edmonds, for people who don't know him. He started the Effective Schools movement. And he has this quote, I used it yesterday in a speech. We can, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. We already know more than we need to do that. Whether or not we do it, it must finally depend on how we feel about the fact that we haven't done it so far. And his entire movement was around, we know enough. It's not like we're dumb about how we educate kids. So if we are not doing it, it's because we haven't put our back into it right now. It's not because the kids are broken. That's what it is. These last two people that Ish, you bring up, Barbara and Ron Edmonds, they shared a kind of this idea that they didn't even have any of the deficit in their thinking. Like, if we're not educating our kids, it's because we haven't gotten it right yet. And I would add, Kajufu onto that, except for, he doesn't get as mainstreamed as these two. I mean, Ronald Edmonds got super mainstreamed. That became part of the Effective Schools movement. But all right, fellas, I want to circle back to the original point of this whole discussion, which is there's an attack on pipelines. There's an attack on Black programs meant to lift up Black children, Black boys. Ish, I think, more on your level, things that would be impacted are things like the Kingmakers in Oakland, or, the Black Office of Achievement in Minneapolis, and all the other districts that have an office like that. I don't know if Philly has that.
Yeah, we got that.
You got something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So on one level, there's that. And then Sharif, as you're trying to build a Black teacher pipeline, Black male teacher pipeline, they wouldn't go after you, but they would go after people trying to fund what it is that you're trying to do. So what's your guys' word on a possible strategy or a possible response? How do we respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think, a part of, I love this quote by Barbara Sizemore that you shared, because I think making sure that we are continuing with the research and that Black intellectual thought and work that's tied to organizing and institution building and defense and offense around it, right? Like not the intelligentsia that's just got their pinky finger up talking, high sedity nonsense, and like you used to call it, like we don't just have the ivory towers, we got the ebony towers now. So making sure that come down those walls and come amongst the people and connect your.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I do not think so. You need to come up, my brother. You need to come up the escalator. I'll be on the 41st floor. Come and see me.
or don't come see me. Prefer that you don't, right?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Right. Send me a letter. So I think that's a big part of it, of making sure that we are, continue to do that. Because I these assaults on equity, I mean, they are just getting started. They are just getting started. Like they've, like even with the, some of their plans they telegraphed a little bit, but, the arrogance of this has always been like, hey, here's what we're going to do. It's like a good football team or a good sports team. They say, here's our playbook. You can't stop it. So we're going to run it anyway. That's the level of confidence they have right now. So the response is always, so what are we going to do? What are we going to do? They've been super clear about their playbook, their actions, their strategy. And we can kind of like, be like that joker on TikTok, like, oh, no, that doesn't really matter. Like, that's how the drownings happen. That's how the drownings happen. They say that Noah was working on that boat for hundreds of years. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen, right? Like, so.
I love the Noah story.
When you take a story like that.
Whatever. Yeah, what you say? Yeah, whatever. And he just kept building his boat, pounding the nails in.
And he even had a son, according to the stories. They were like, no, I'm going to go up there, like, right, and like that. So that those kind of that allegory is appropriate right now. We better be building.
Ish, what do you think we should be doing to defend like the Kingmakers type programs and the district programs?
Well, I mean, we got to do it even if there is not a program that exists. We need to really like embed that within the very functioning of what is being focused on and be unapologetic about it. We need to have folks going and teaching as professors and adjunct professors in teacher preparation programs, purposely with the intention of having this engaged and involved within the very thing that they're teaching. And then using the research that's being done, hopefully by our scholars, and using the ideas of our ancestors that have articulated ideas around this, right? And then bring that to the fore. I would also say that it's very important also to have this within anything that puts any adult in front of our children, even if we're talking about white adults, right? Because there is something to say about the importance of this history collectively, that if you're a good person, are you a good person? Like, do you stand for justice? Do you stand for the things in which you have been brought up to think that this society actually does? And now that you know that is not true, do you actually stand for those things? And how are you going to reconcile that reality?
I mean, you made in there, I don't know if this is the point exactly that you put in there, but there was a point in there that you made, was that we often forget about John Brown. So we think Black people aren't doing enough. We're not doing enough, blah, blah, blah. And we can't do that to the exclusion of the fact that we have allies that are not just, one group. We have brown allies. We have Asian allies. We have white allies that are more on the John Brown tip. And we can't pass them by, right? Because in terms of a total strategy, like a global strategy, I think it takes people at all levels to be able to defeat something that's operating on all levels, right? It'd be nice that, what's the white version of the spook in the room? Is there a version of that? Like, the spook who sat by the door.
Well, the CIA?
Yeah. No, their version is just them. Because this whole society is is built in that way. So they could be by any door and if they're about equity and justice.
So and it's very important. I just want to make this one last point. It's very important that we keep in mind the intellectual genealogy that informs a lot of what people think this society is all about and how world relations and how racial relations operate. And a lot of that is rooted in a very fundamentally racist, anti-Black trope. And then when we look at how other people come into this society and try to make sense over the dichotomized reality that this society has made coming from their own circumstances, it leads to a lot of confusion. So we just got to be really clear about what we're facing. And at times I feel like we don't. I feel like folks are more concerned about what Jaguar Wright said about Jay-Z and Beyonce than they care about what is going on right now with voting rights in Louisiana.
You have
and
such
so, like,
range,
when we
man.
look at
You
that,
have such range.
Yeah,
He had me with Last Poets, and then he said, "What do you say, Jaguar?" I'm just like, "There's a Jaguar in the space now." Like, wow, like this.
Listen. He pulled out the words too because he said dichotomize. I was like, well, damn, dichotomized. Like, I'm gonna have to put that one in my arsenal. I'm just gonna say it 4 times in every speech so that people know I mean business. As a matter of fact, I'm like yesterday I gave a keynote. I'm just gonna start my keynotes with dichotomize. And then I'm gonna drop the mic and walk out. Like, I hope y'all got what I was meaning to tell you.
What was the group you used to always reference? Oh my gosh, they were. I'm going blank on their name, but you also used to do a parody about them. This rap group back in the day. They used to wear like an Africa sticker on their hat. And
that could be so
anyway,
many.
It was like that kind of voice, huh?
Yeah. There could be so many that fit that bill. They would say the words like in living color. My dude from The Living Color, who was like in jail, was a Damon Wayans character, right? Dichotomize. Well, listen, brothers, I appreciate you as always. This has been another good episode. That group. So I think my takeaway from this is the battle hasn't ceased, and we can't act like it has. Like any day that we wake up feeling like we've made it or we're over the mountain or something like that, whatever. That's a sentiment that will come back and bite us because we'll have issues like the one that started this conversation. Attacks on the very things that we're doing to make sure that we promote ourselves and get our young people into pipelines that lead to something good. And I think it's incumbent on us that have a little bit of age to us to defend them until our dying day, until our last last breath has to be dedicated to make sure that we leave behind pipelines for them that they can get to where they need to get. And the work that you two do, honestly, couldn't be more about that. Couldn't be more about knowing, I mean, Ish, the young people that are coming through the work that you do and coming through the schools that you do and your life's work. When you are long gone, that's going to have reverberations in their grandchildren. And the same thing with you, Sharif. Like all these people that you are working with to put in a pipeline, it's legacy work because you are sending a message to the future. There's going to be some kid in 2075 or 2086. Get your mind around this. I was actually at a Montessori school looking at these kids, and it hit me at some point. These kids are going to see the year 2100. And I was like, wow. So if you are running a Montessori kindergarten right now, everything you are doing for them is going to see the year 2100. Wow. And I had to make sure I was getting my math right because, I'm kind of Montessori about math.
Did you go to the Montessori kid to help? Like, hey, kid, come over here. Give me those beads and balls and those blocks, those number blocks. Help me out here.
Now, that could be a whole other show, and we should come back to it because I learned my lesson. I used to talk crap about Montessori, but the 2 schools I visited in the last week was super eye-opening. So I want to come back to that as a discussion. But maybe remember that in all the work that we do, that long after we're gone, there's going to come a year where what you did today is actually going to be still having an impact and reverberating in somebody. 2085, 2095, 2100. And we're already there. So anyways, this has been another episode of Freedom Friday. And you are still not free. But if you've been watching us for this 1 hour, we hope that you are freer than when we started. So we will see you next week on the next episode. Peace.